The asphalt of 4th Street tasted like oil and blood. 19-year-old Sawyer Sterling lay pinned beneath the crushing weight of a knee, his breath hitching in ragged gasps. Above him, the flickering blue and red lights of the cruiser painted the suburban trees in a chaotic strobe light warning. "You think you're smart, boy," the officer sneered, tightening his grip on Sawyer's wrist until the joint popped. "You think a suit makes you one of us." Sawyer didn't scream. He didn't beg. He just closed his eyes and whispered 3 words that would topple a city's entire corrupt hierarchy. "Call my father," because they didn't know who they were hurting. They didn't know they had just declared war on the Attorney General. The vintage 1969 Shelby GT 500 hummed a low guttural growl as it coasted down the winding roads of Oak Creek. It was a masterpiece of American engineering, midnight blue, pristine chrome, and an engine that sounded like a thunderstorm trapped in a bottle. Behind the wheel sat Sawyer Sterling. At 19, Sawyer wasn't the type of kid who looked for trouble. He was a sophomore at Georgetown, a pre-law major with a 4.0 GPA and a brooding intensity that made him look older than he was. He wore a fitted charcoal blazer over a white t-shirt, his tortoiseshell glasses sliding slightly down his nose as he checked the dashboard clock. "Dad's gonna kill me," Sawyer muttered to himself, though a small smile played on his lips. He had promised to have the car back in the garage by curfew. The Shelby wasn't just a car, it was Bennett Sterling's pride and joy. Bennett Sterling, a man known to the public as the Iron Hammer of the state's judicial system, the first black attorney general in the state's history, and a man who treated his vintage car with more tenderness than he treated most defense attorneys. Sawyer had spent the last several hours at the university library, buried in case studies for his constitutional law midterms. He was exhausted. The only thing on his mind was the leftover lasagna in the fridge and the softness of his pillow. He signaled a left turn onto Sycamore Avenue, a wealthy, quiet enclave where the lawns were manicured to the millimeter and the neighbors called the cops if a dog barked too loudly after dark. It was his neighborhood. He had grown up riding his bike on these sidewalks. As he straightened the wheel, the rearview mirror exploded with light. Sawyer's stomach dropped. The piercing wail of a siren cut through the Shelby's rumble. "Damn it!" he hissed, tapping the steering wheel. He wasn't speeding. He knew that for a fact. He was doing 25 in a 25 zone. Maybe a taillight was out. He pulled over slowly, easing the expensive tires against the curb to avoid scratching the rims. He killed the engine. He rolled down the window. He placed both hands on the top of the steering wheel, fingers spread wide. He knew the drill. Every black father in America gave his son the talk. Bennett Sterling, despite his power and position, had been even more rigorous about it. "Badge number, demeanor, compliance," his father would say, his voice grave. "You are not Sawyer Sterling, the AG's son, when you get pulled over. You are just a suspect. Survive the stop, Sawyer. We litigate later." Sawyer watched the side mirror. 2 shadows detached themselves from the blinding glare of the cruiser's headlights. The first officer was a towering slab of a man, thick-necked with a buzz cut that looked like it had been done with sandpaper. This was Officer Vince Sarge Kowalski. He had a reputation in the precinct, though Sawyer didn't know it yet. Kowalski was known for his stats. He made more arrests than anyone else, mostly because he manufactured reasons to make them. The second was younger, skittish, his hand resting nervously on his holster. Officer Tate, a rookie. Kowalski walked up to the driver's side, his flashlight beam cutting directly into Sawyer's eyes. Sawyer squinted but didn't move his hands. "License and registration," Kowalski barked. "No, good evening." "No, do you know why I pulled you over?" "It's in the glove box, officer," Sawyer said, his voice steady and practiced. "I'm going to reach for it now." "Don't tell me what you're going to do. Just do it," Kowalski snapped. Sawyer moved slowly. He opened the glove compartment, the small light illuminating the leather-bound registration folder. He handed it over along with his license. Kowalski snatched them. He shone the light on the license, then back at Sawyer, then at the interior of the car. His eyes lingered on the expensive leather seats, the custom dashboard, and finally Sawyer's blazer. Sawyer Sterling. Kowalski read the name with a mocking lilt. He looked at the registration. "Car belongs to a Bennett Sterling. Who's that? Your daddy?" "Yes, sir," Sawyer said politely. "I'm heading home. I live 3 blocks away on Crest View." Kowalski let out a sharp, dry laugh. He turned to Tate, the rookie who was standing by the passenger window, peering in. "Hear that, Tate?" He lives on Crest View in $1 million house driving a $100,000 car." "Nice ride," Tate muttered, looking unsure. Kowalski leaned in closer, his breath smelling of stale coffee and aggression. "You know, Sawyer, we've had a lot of reports of stolen luxury vehicles in this area lately. High-end car, young kid late at night. It doesn't add up." "I didn't steal it," Sawyer said, fighting the urge to frown. "It's my father's car. You can run the plates. The address on my license matches the registration." "I can run whatever I want," Kowalski interrupted. "Step out of the car." Sawyer's heart skipped a beat. "Officer, am I under arrest? I haven't committed a traffic violation." "I said step out of the car." Kowalski's voice dropped an octave, losing the mocking lilt and becoming pure steel. Sawyer hesitated for a fraction of a second. That was his first mistake. The door was ripped open before Sawyer could undo his seatbelt. Kowalski's hand, the size of a catcher's mitt, clamped onto Sawyer's upper arm. With a violent jerk, he hauled Sawyer out of the low-slung sports car. Sawyer stumbled, his dress shoes slipping on the gravel near the curb. "Whoa, okay, I'm out," Sawyer yelled, hands shooting up instantly. "Stop resisting," Kowalski roared, spinning Sawyer around and slamming him chest first onto the hood of the Shelby. The sound of metal buckling, however slight, sent a spike of horror through Sawyer. Dad's car. "I'm not resisting," Sawyer gasped, his cheek pressed against the cold metal. "Check the dash cam. I'm complying." "Pat him down, Tate," Kowalski ordered, pinning Sawyer's neck with his forearm. The rookie stepped forward, patting down Sawyer's legs, his waist, his pockets. He pulled out a sleek iPhone and a leather wallet. "Clean, Sarge," Tate said. "Just a phone and wallet." "Check the car," Kowalski commanded. "Officer," Sawyer said, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. He knew the law. He knew it better than these two did. "You need probable cause to search the vehicle. I haven't consented to a search." Kowalski leaned close to Sawyer's ear. "Probable cause is whatever I say it is." "I smell marijuana." "You absolutely do not," Sawyer shot back, his indignation finally overriding his fear. "I don't smoke. This car has never been smoked in." "You're lying," Kowalski stiffened. The air around them seemed to freeze. In the distance, a dog barked, lonely and unaware of the violence brewing on the street corner. "Lying," Kowalski whispered. He grabbed a handful of Sawyer's hair and yanked his head back. "You call me a liar, boy." "I know my rights," Sawyer gritted out, wincing from the pain in his scalp. "Section 1983, Fourth Amendment violation, unlawful detainment. If you damage this car, you will be liable." Kowalski laughed, but it was a dark, ugly sound. "We got a lawyer here, Tate, a jailhouse lawyer." Kowalski kicked Sawyer's legs apart harder than necessary, forcing him to spread his stance until his muscles strained. Then, with a swift, practiced motion, he handcuffed Sawyer, the metal bit deep into the wrist bone. "You're under arrest," Kowalski said. "For what?" Sawyer shouted, struggling slightly as the cuffs pinched. "Disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and—" Kowalski paused, looking at the rookie. "Tate finds something in that car." Tate looked at Sawyer, then at Kowalski. "Sarge, the car looks clean. Maybe we just write him a ticket for the taillight." "I said search the damn car," Kowalski barked. "Tear it apart if you have to." Sawyer watched in horror as Tate opened the passenger door. He saw the rookie digging through the glove box, throwing the owner's manual on the floor. He saw him lifting the floor mats. "Stop!" Sawyer yelled. "That's a classic. You're tearing the upholstery." "Shut him up," Kowalski muttered. Kowalski grabbed Sawyer by the back of the blazer and hauled him away from the car toward the curb. He swept Sawyer's legs. Sawyer hit the ground hard, the air leaving his lungs in a pained whoosh. His shoulder took the brunt of the impact, grinding into the asphalt. "Stay down," Kowalski said, resting his hand on his baton. Sawyer gasped for air, staring up at the starry sky. He felt a trickle of warm blood running down his temple where it had grazed the pavement. He needed to be smart. He needed to de-escalate. "Officer," Sawyer wheezed. "My father, his name is Bennett Sterling. Please just check the name." "I don't care if your daddy is the Pope," Kowalski spat, looming over him like a gargoyle. "Tonight you belong to me." Tate came back from the car holding a small clear plastic baggie. He looked pale. "Sarge, I found this under the seat." Sawyer squinted. It was a bag of white powder. "No," Sawyer whispered, his blood running cold. "That's not mine. That's impossible. I just had the car detailed yesterday. That's not mine." Kowalski grinned. It was a predatory, satisfied smile. Well, well, looks like we got ourselves a trafficker. Narcotics possession, transporting with intent to sell. You planted that? Sawyer screamed, struggling against the cuffs. He planted that. I saw him reach into his pocket before he went under the seat. Kowalski's boot connected with Sawyer's ribs. A sharp crack echoed through the quiet street. Pain exploded in Sawyer's side, blinding and white-hot. He curled into a ball, gasping, unable to draw a breath. That's for accusing an officer of the law, Kowalski said calmly. He looked at Tate. Get him in the back. We're taking him to the Fourth Precinct. We'll process him there. And Tate. Yes, Sarge. The rookie's voice trembled. Turn off your body cam. Battery-saving mode. Sawyer lay on the ground, the taste of copper filling his mouth. His ribs were on fire. He watched through blurred vision as Tate hesitated, then reached up to his chest and tapped the camera. The little blinking red light went dark. They dragged him up. Sawyer's legs felt like jelly. As they shoved him toward the cruiser, Sawyer looked at the Shelby one last time. The door was open, papers strewn everywhere, the sanctity of his father's prized possession violated. But as they pushed his head down to force him into the back of the police car, Sawyer's mind cleared. The pain was there, yes, but something else had taken over. A cold, hard resolve. He looked Kowalski dead in the eye. You made a mistake, Sawyer said softly. Kowalski slammed the door in his face. Inside the cage of the cruiser, the smell of old vomit and disinfectant was suffocating. Sawyer leaned his head against the plexiglass divider. His phone was in the front seat, confiscated. He had no way to call anyone, but he knew where they were going. The Fourth Precinct. And he knew something Kowalski didn't. Bennett Sterling wasn't just at home waiting for his car. Tonight was the annual state judiciary gala. Bennett Sterling was currently having dinner with the governor and the chief of police. If Sawyer could just get one phone call, just one. The cruiser's engine roared to life, and they peeled away from the curb, leaving the beautiful blue Shelby abandoned on the side of the road, a silent witness to the crime that had just been committed by the men wearing badges. The ride to the Fourth Precinct was a blur of shadows and passing streetlights, each one a rhythmic strobe illuminating the grim reality of Sawyer's situation. The plastic seat of the cruiser was hard and slick, offering no traction as the car took sharp turns. With his hands cuffed behind his back, Sawyer slid helplessly, his bruised shoulder slamming into the door panel with every corner Kowalski took at reckless speed. Up front, the atmosphere was thick with a toxic camaraderie. Did you see his face? Kowalski chuckled, the sound vibrating through the plexiglass divider. Looked like he was going to cry when I found the baggie. They always cry. It's the rich kid defense mechanism. Yeah, Tate replied. Though his voice lacked conviction, he was staring out of the passenger window, avoiding the rearview mirror. He really knew the codes though, Sarge. Section 1983. That specific. They all watch Law and Order, Tate. Kowalski scoffed, turning the cruiser onto the industrial strip where the precinct sat like a concrete fortress. Knowing the code numbers doesn't stop the cuffs from clicking. Besides, who's the judge going to believe? A 19-year-old with a bag of blow in a stolen car, or a decorated sergeant with 15 years on the force? Sawyer forced himself to breathe through his nose. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4. It was a technique his father had taught him before his first mock trial competition. Panic was the enemy. Panic clouded judgment. He needed to catalog everything. Officer Vince Kowalski, badge number 4922. Officer Tate, no badge number visible but rookie insignia. Injuries, contusion on the right temple, cracked or bruised ribs on the left side, lacerations on wrists from over-tightened cuffs. The cruiser slowed, passing through the chain-link gates of the precinct sallyport. The heavy metal door rolled down behind them with a final tomb-like clatter. Kowalski killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. All right, Counselor, Kowalski said, opening the back door. Welcome to the Hilton. He grabbed Sawyer by the collar of his expensive blazer, now scuffed and dirty, and yanked him out. Sawyer's legs were stiff, his knees buckling slightly before he found his footing. The pain in his side was a sharp, biting animal gnawing at him with every movement. They marched him through the rear entrance. The precinct smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and unwashed bodies. It was a sensory assault. Fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing buzz. They passed a holding cell where 2 men were arguing loudly. A drunk woman was singing a hymn on a bench, one shoe missing. Officers moved through the hallways with tired indifference, carrying paperwork or coffee cups. Kowalski paraded Sawyer through the booking area like a trophy hunter displaying a kill. "What you got there, Sarge?" asked a heavy-set officer leaning against a filing cabinet, chewing on a toothpick. "Big bust." Kowalski grinned, shoving Sawyer forward so hard he nearly tripped over his own feet. "Possession with intent. Caught him rolling in a Shelby GT. Probably stolen, though the plates haven't come back hot yet. Kid claims he's royalty." The heavy-set officer laughed. "They're all royalty on a Friday night." Sawyer kept his head down, not out of shame, but to hide the burning rage in his eyes. He saw the way they looked at him. They didn't see a Georgetown student. They didn't see a human being. They saw a statistic, a bonus check, a story to tell at the bar. They reached the booking desk. The desk sergeant was a woman with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, her nameplate reading Sergeant Reyes. She didn't look up from her computer screen. "Name?" she asked, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Sawyer Sterling," Kowalski answered for him. "I can speak," Sawyer rasped. His throat was dry, tasting of dust. He looked at the woman. "My name is Sawyer Sterling." Reyes looked up, her eyes tired and hard. She scanned him, the ripped blazer, the blood on his forehead, the handcuffs. Date of birth, October 14th, 2004. Address 1402 Crestview Drive. Reyes paused. Her fingers stopped typing. She knew the neighborhood. Everyone knew Crestview. It was where the judges, the senators, and the tech CEOs lived. She looked at Kowalski, raising an eyebrow. "Crestview?" she asked. "He lives there." Kowalski shrugged, leaning an elbow on the high counter. "Probably the gardener's kid taking the boss's car for a joyride. Found a bag of snow under the seat." "I did not possess any narcotics," Sawyer said firmly, staring directly at the camera mounted in the corner of the room. "Officer Kowalski planted evidence after an unlawful search. I am injured, and I am requesting medical attention." Kowalski leaned in, his voice a low growl. "You keep flapping your gums, kid, and you're going to trip and fall on your way to the cell. Accidents happen." Reyes sighed, a sound of deep exhaustion. She'd seen this play out 1,000 times. She didn't care about the truth. She just wanted to get through her shift. "Book him, Prince. Mugshot, then put him in holding cell 2. It's empty." "I want my phone call," Sawyer said. Kowalski laughed. "You get a call when we say you get a call. Right now, the phones are down. Ain't that right, Reyes?" It was a test, a blatant corruption test. Kowalski was daring the desk sergeant to contradict him. Reyes looked at Sawyer, then at Kowalski. She saw the bruising on the kid's face. She saw the quality of his clothes, and she saw the glint in Kowalski's eyes that suggested he was itching for round 2. "Phones are working fine, Vince," Reyes said flatly. She wasn't dirty, just tired, but she knew procedure. If this kid really was from Crestview, denying a phone call was a lawsuit waiting to happen. "Process him, then let him make his call. I'm not having the captain chew my ass out tomorrow because you wanted to play games." Kowalski's jaw tightened. He glared at Reyes, then spat on the floor. "Fine, let's get the pictures. Smile for the camera, superstar." The humiliation of the booking process was designed to break the spirit. It was a systematic stripping of identity. First, the property. Sawyer watched as his wallet, his watch, a graduation gift from his grandfather, and his belt were tossed into a plastic bin. They took his shoelaces. "So you don't hang yourself," Tate had mumbled, avoiding Sawyer's eyes. Then the prints. His hands, usually accustomed to turning the delicate pages of law textbooks, were grabbed roughly. Ink was rolled over his fingertips. Press, roll, lift. The black ink stained his skin, marking him. Then the photo. "Stand against the wall," Kowalski barked. Sawyer stood. He was 6'2", but he felt small. The height chart behind him was a cold gray ruler of his new reality. Chin up, look forward. Flash. The blinding light burned the image into the system. A permanent record. Sawyer Sterling, criminal. "All right," Kowalski said, grabbing Sawyer's arm again. "Cell time." "My call," Sawyer said. He didn't move. He planted his feet. Kowalski stopped. The air in the room grew thin. "You really are pushing your luck." "Sergeant Reyes said I get a call," Sawyer said, looking past Kowalski to the desk. "Sergeant, I know my rights. Under State Statute 859-5, an arrestee has the right to 3 completed phone calls within 3 hours of arrest. I want to make one." Kowalski looked ready to strike him again. His hand twitched toward his baton. "Let him make the call, Vince," Reyes called out from the desk, not looking up from her paperwork. Get it over with so we can put him in the tank." Kowalski sneered. He shoved Sawyer toward a wall-mounted phone near the holding cells. It was an old, battered metal box with a short, steel-corded handset. "You got 2 minutes," Kowalski hissed. "And if I hear you crying to your mommy, I'm going to disconnect it myself." Kowalski stood close, too close. He was listening, intimidating. Sawyer picked up the receiver. His hands were shaking, the adrenaline finally giving way to the shock of the trauma. His fingers, stained with black ink, hovered over the keypad. He knew only one number by heart that mattered right now. He dialed. Ring, ring, ring. Sawyer closed his eyes. "Pick up, please pick up." The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton. The chandeliers were made of Austrian crystal, casting a warm golden glow over the room. The air smelled of expensive perfume, truffle oil, and old money. A string quartet was playing a soft rendition of Vivaldi in the corner. Bennett Sterling sat at the head table, a glass of sparkling water in his hand. At 55, he was a commanding presence, broad-shouldered, with a beard trimmed to geometric perfection and eyes that could dissect a witness's soul from across a courtroom. He was wearing a tuxedo that cost more than Officer Kowalski made in 3 months. To his right sat the governor. To his left, the chief of police, a man named Warren Knox. "The crime rates are down, Bennett," Chief Knox was saying, cutting into his filet mignon. "My boys are doing good work. Aggressive policing. It works." Bennett swirled his water. "Aggressive can be effective, Warren, provided it remains constitutional. We've had a rise in excessive force complaints this quarter. I'm keeping an eye on it." Knox chuckled, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "You lawyers worry too much. You have to break a few eggs to make an omelet." Bennett was about to retort when he felt the vibration against his chest. He frowned. He rarely kept his phone on during events, but tonight he was waiting for a call regarding a federal appeal. He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out the device. The screen didn't show the federal office. It showed a picture of a smiling boy in a graduation cap. Sawyer. Bennett held up a finger to the governor. "Apologies, my son. I need to take this." He answered the phone, bringing it to his ear. "Sawyer, you're late. You better have a flat tire." "Dad." The voice on the other end was small, broken. It was a voice Bennett hadn't heard since Sawyer was 6 years old and had fallen out of the oak tree in the backyard. Bennett stood up. The movement was abrupt enough that the governor paused mid-sentence. "Sawyer, what's wrong?" Bennett's voice dropped, losing its social warmth, becoming clinical and sharp. "Dad, I'm at the Fourth Precinct." Bennett walked away from the table, moving toward the quiet of the terrace doors. "The Fourth? Why? Were you in an accident?" "No," Sawyer's voice cracked. "I was pulled over. Dad, they beat me." Bennett Sterling stopped. The world around him, the music, the laughter, the clinking glasses, ceased to exist. The only sound was the rushing of blood in his ears. "Who?" Bennett whispered. "Officer Kowalski and a rookie named Tate. They pulled me over on Sycamore. They slammed my head into the hood. They kicked my ribs. Dad, they planted drugs." "Drugs." Bennett repeated the word as if it were a foreign language. "White powder under the seat. They turned off their body cams, Dad. They turned them off before they put me in the car." On the other end of the line, Bennett heard a harsh, grating voice in the background. "Time's up, drug lord. Hang it up." "I have to go," Sawyer whispered, panic rising in his voice. "They're putting me in a cell. I didn't do it, Dad. I swear." "Sawyer," Bennett said. His voice was no longer that of a father. It was the voice of the Attorney General. It was a terrifyingly calm, deep resonance that promised total annihilation. "Listen to me. Say nothing. Sign nothing. Do not speak to anyone. Do you understand?" "Yes," Sawyer sobbed. "I am coming," Bennett said. The line went dead. Bennett lowered the phone slowly. He stared at the black screen for a second. His hand was trembling, not from fear, but from a rage so pure, so ancient, that it felt like magma moving through his veins. He turned back toward the ballroom. He walked back to the head table. The governor looked up, smiling. "Everything all right?" "Teenager trouble." Bennett didn't sit down. He stood over the table, casting a long shadow over the chief of police. "Warren," Bennett said. The chief looked up, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. The smile faded from his face. "Bennett, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Your men," Bennett said, his voice carrying clearly over the music, causing the nearby tables to fall silent. "Have my son." "What?" Knox blinked. Arrested. For what? Drunk driving. For driving while black in my car, Bennett said, his voice rising, cutting through the room like a jagged blade. They beat him. They planted evidence. And they turned off their body cameras. A hush fell over the entire gala. The string quartet stopped playing. Bennett, surely there's a misunderstanding, Knox began, standing up. Officers Kowalski and Tate. Bennett recited the names Sawyer had given him. He had memorized them instantly. Fourth Precinct. Bennett turned to the governor. Governor, I am declaring a conflict of interest in all matters regarding the Fourth Precinct effective immediately because I am about to tear it down to the foundation. He looked back at the chief of police. Get your car, Warren, Bennett commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an order from the highest legal authority in the state. You are driving me there right now. Bennett, wait. If my son has one more bruise on him when I get there than he did when he called me. Bennett leaned in, his face inches from the chief's. I will indict every single person in that building. Move. Bennett Sterling turned on his heel and marched toward the exit. He didn't check his coat. He didn't say goodbye. He walked out of the Ritz-Carlton with the kinetic energy of a hurricane making landfall, and 3 steps behind him, pale and sweating, trotted the chief of police. Inside, holding cell 2, time had lost its meaning. There were no windows, only the incessant, maddening hum of a fluorescent light protected by a wire cage. It flickered with a rhythmic sound, a metronome counting down the seconds of Sawyer's misery. Sawyer sat on the edge of the steel bench, his elbows resting on his knees, head hanging low. The adrenaline had completely faded, leaving behind a jagged landscape of pain. His ribs throbbed with every shallow breath. His temple, where the pavement had kissed his skin, was swollen and hot to the touch. But the physical pain was secondary to the psychological terror. He was a law student. He knew the statistics. He knew that once a charge was entered into the system, it became a stain that no amount of bleach could ever fully remove. Even if he was exonerated, the arrest record would exist. The mugshot would exist. Possession with intent. It was a career killer. He looked at his hands. They were trembling. He clasped them together, trying to channel his father, stoicism. Bennett Sterling always preached, the law is logic, not emotion. But logic didn't work here. Logic didn't apply to Officer Kowalski. Out in the bullpen area, separated from the cells by a heavy security door, the atmosphere was relaxed. It was the graveyard shift, usually quiet, and the officers were settling into the lull. Officer Kowalski sat at his desk, hunting and pecking at a keyboard with 2 thick fingers. He was typing up the arrest report. Suspect exhibited aggressive behavior. Suspect refused lawful commands. Narcotics discovered in plain view. He took a sip of lukewarm coffee and smirked. It was a work of fiction, but in his mind, it was a masterpiece. He was getting a dangerous drug dealer off the streets. He was a hero. Sarge. Kowalski didn't look up. What is it, Tate? You finished logging the evidence? Officer Tate stood by the desk, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He looked sick. Yeah, it's logged. But Sarge, I've been thinking. Don't hurt yourself, kid. The car. Tate lowered his voice, glancing around to make sure the other officers weren't listening. The registration. It really did match the kid's license and the address. Crestview. That's the Gold Coast. People there have lawyers on speed dial. Kowalski stopped typing. He swiveled his chair around slowly, the springs squeaking in protest. He looked at the rookie with eyes that were cold and dead. Let me explain something to you, Tate, Kowalski said, his voice low and dangerous. You think because some kid lives in a fancy house, these innocent rich kids are the worst junkies of them all. They think they're untouchable. But the baggie, Tate whispered, his voice trembling. Sarge, I saw you. I mean, before you went under the seat, your hand went to your vest pocket. Kowalski stood up. He moved into Tate's personal space, looming over him. You saw nothing, Kowalski hissed. You saw excellent police work. You saw a veteran officer trusting his gut. And you saw a felony arrest that is going to look very good in your file when review time comes around. He poked Tate in the chest with a thick finger. We are the thin blue line, Tate. We protect society from the garbage. Sometimes the garbage drives a Shelby. Sometimes it drives a Honda. It doesn't matter. We take it out. Are we clear? Tate swallowed hard. He felt a knot of guilt tightening in his stomach. But the fear of Kowalski, the fear of being ostracized by the brotherhood of the precinct, was stronger. We're clear, Sarge, Tate mumbled. good. Now go get me a donut. I'm starving." Kowalski sat back down, satisfied. He turned back to the screen, typing the final sentence of his report. He hit save with a flourish. He leaned back, interlacing his fingers behind his head. "Quiet night," he muttered to himself, "just the way I like it." He had no idea that the quiet wasn't peace. It was the vacuum before an explosion. The automatic glass doors of the Fourth Precinct entrance slid open with a soft whoosh. Usually at this hour, the only people walking through those doors were drunks being hauled in, weeping victims filing reports, or exhausted beat cops coming off shift. The air in the lobby was stagnant, a mix of floor wax and apathy. But the moment Bennett Sterling crossed the threshold, the air pressure in the room seemed to drop. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He walked with a terrifying, rhythmic precision. The heels of his dress shoes clicked against the linoleum like the ticking of a bomb. His tuxedo was stark black against the drab beige of the precinct walls, a visual anomaly that commanded instant attention. His face was a mask of granite. 3 steps behind him, Chief of Police Warren Knox looked like a man marching to his own execution. His face was pale, glistening with sweat, his uniform disheveled from the hasty car ride. Sergeant Reyes was at the front desk, staring at a crossword puzzle. She heard the footsteps, too confident, too purposeful for this time of night. She looked up annoyed, ready to tell whoever it was to take a number. Her mouth fell open. The pen dropped from her hand. She didn't see a father. She saw the face that was on the news every other night. She saw the signature at the bottom of the department's funding documents. She saw the state attorney general, and he looked like he was there to burn the building down. Mr. Sterling," Reyes stammered, scrambling to stand up. Her chair rolled back and hit the filing cabinet with a loud clang. Bennett didn't stop until he was pressed against the high counter. He placed both hands on the surface. His knuckles were white. "Where is he?" Bennett asked. His voice wasn't loud. It was a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the desk. "Sir," Reyes squeaked. "My son," Bennett said, enunciating every consonant. "Sawyer Sterling. He was brought in earlier. Where is he?" Reyes's eyes darted to the computer screen, then to the heavy security door leading to the back. Yes, he's in holding cell 2, but sir, you can't be back here. This is a restricted—" "Sergeant!" A voice barked from behind Bennett. Reyes looked past Bennett to see Chief Knox. "Chief," she gasped, "I didn't know you were—" "Open the door, Reyes," Knox ordered, his voice cracking slightly. "Buzz us in now." Reyes didn't ask questions. She hit the buzzer. The heavy magnetic lock on the security door clicked open with a loud clack. Bennett pushed through the door, moving into the operational heart of the precinct. The bullpen was buzzing with low activity. Half a dozen officers were at their desks. They looked up as the tuxedo-clad man strode into their sanctuary. Confusion rippled through the room. Who was this civilian walking into the secure zone? Kowalski was halfway through a glazed donut. He saw the movement and spun his chair around. He saw a tall black man in a tuxedo looking furious. Kowalski didn't recognize Bennett Sterling. He didn't follow state politics. He only saw a wealthy, angry black man who thought he owned the place. Kowalski stood up, wiping sugar from his mouth. He stepped into the aisle, blocking Bennett's path. "Whoa, hold on there, Slick," Kowalski said, puffing out his chest. "You lost. This is a restricted area. You can't just waltz in here like you own the joint." Bennett stopped. He looked at Kowalski. He looked at the badge number 4922. The recognition in Bennett's eyes was terrifying. It was the look of a predator, finally spotting its prey. "Officer Vince Kowalski," Bennett said softly. "That's sergeant to you," Kowalski sneered, his hand drifting instinctively toward his belt. A subtle intimidation tactic. "And unless you want to join your kid in a cell for trespassing, you better turn your ass around and walk out that door." Behind Bennett, Chief Knox entered the room. He saw the interaction. He saw Kowalski posturing up against the man who held the power to indict the entire department. "Kowalski!" Knox screamed. The sound tore through the room, shattering the tension. Kowalski blinked, looking over Bennett's shoulder. "Chief, what are you doing here?" Knox rushed forward, shoving himself between Bennett and Kowalski. He looked at his sergeant with a mix of fury and terror. "Step back," Knox spat. "Stand down right now." "Chief, I was just handling this civilian," Kowalski said, confused. "He just walked in here demanding—" "This civilian," Knox interrupted, his voice shaking with rage, "is the Attorney General of this state, Bennett Sterling." And the silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was a physical weight. Kowalski froze. His eyes went from Knox to Bennett. The name registered, Sterling, Sawyer Sterling, the car owner, Bennett Sterling. The blood drained from Kowalski's face so fast it left him looking gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Bennett stepped around the chief. He didn't even look at Kowalski anymore. He treated the man like he was furniture. "Open the cell," Bennett commanded, staring at the row of steel doors. Knox fumbled for his master keys. Yes, sir, right away. Reyes, which cell?" "Number 2, Reyes yelled from the booking desk, her voice high with panic. Knox ran to the door of cell 2. He jammed the key in, twisted it, and swung the heavy door open. Bennett stepped into the doorway. Inside, Sawyer looked up. He was curled against the wall, holding his ribs. His blazer was torn. There was dried blood on his temple. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of trauma and disbelief. When he saw his father standing there in his tuxedo like a guardian angel sent from a gala, Sawyer's composure broke. "Dad," Sawyer whispered. Bennett's knees almost gave out. Seeing his son in a cage, battered and broken, was a punch to the gut harder than any physical blow. The attorney general vanished. The father took over. Bennett rushed into the cell and fell to his knees on the dirty concrete. He wrapped his arms around his son. "I've got you," Bennett whispered fiercely, pulling Sawyer's head against his shoulder. "I've got you, son. You're safe." Sawyer buried his face in his father's expensive jacket and sobbed. It was a raw, guttural sound that echoed off the steel walls. Bennett held him tight, one hand cradling the back of Sawyer's head. He felt the bump on Sawyer's skull. He felt the flinch when he touched Sawyer's ribs. Bennett closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of the cell, the smell of his son's fear. Then he opened his eyes. He looked out the cell door. Kowalski was standing there watching. The arrogance was gone. The bully was gone. In his place was a man who suddenly realized he was standing on the tracks and the train was not stopping. Bennett slowly stood up, helping Sawyer to his feet. He kept an arm around his son's waist to support him. They walked out of the cell. Bennett stopped in the middle of the bullpen. He looked at the chief. He looked at the other officers who were staring at their feet. Finally, he fixed his gaze on Kowalski. "Chief Knox," Bennett said. His voice was ice. "Yes, sir," Knox whispered. "I want this precinct sealed," Bennett said. "Nobody leaves. Nobody enters. I want internal affairs here shortly. I want the state police forensics unit here to sweep my vehicle and process the evidence this officer found." Bennett pointed a shaking finger at Kowalski. "And I want him," Bennett said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of a death sentence. "Stripped of his badge and gun. Right now." The silence in the bullpen was no longer heavy. It was suffocating. It was the silence of a tomb where a career had just gone to die. Chief Knox's hands shook as he unclipped the radio from Officer Kowalski's belt. He placed it on the desk with a clatter. Then he reached for the badge. "Chief," Kowalski stammered, his face a mask of disbelief. "You're letting him do this over a traffic stop. I'm your best guy. I bring in the numbers." "Give me the badge, Vince," Knox whispered, his voice dry. He wouldn't look Kowalski in the eye. He could feel Bennett Sterling's gaze burning a hole through his uniform, a laser focus waiting for a single misstep. Kowalski didn't move. He looked at the badge pinned to his chest, Shield number 4922. It was his identity. It was his power. Without it, he was just a bully in a polyester uniform. "Take it," Bennett Sterling said. The command didn't come with a shout. It was spoken with the finality of a gavel drop. Knox reached out and unpinned the badge. He held the silver shield in his hand for a moment, the metal catching the fluorescent light before dropping it onto the desk next to the radio. "Gun," Knox said. Kowalski slowly unbuckled his holster. He placed his service weapon on the desk. He looked smaller now. The bulk of his muscles seemed to sag, his posture collapsing inward. "Am I under arrest?" Kowalski spat, trying to salvage a shred of dignity. "Because if I am, I want my union rep." "Oh, you'll get your rep," Bennett said, stepping closer. He was still supporting Sawyer, whose breathing was ragged but steadying. "But first, we're going to wait for the truth." Shortly after, the precinct was swarming, but not with local cops. The state police had arrived in force, their cruisers blocking the precinct entrance in a phalanx of blue and gold. They moved with a clinical, military precision that made the local officers look like amateurs. They weren't there to assist. They were there to investigate. Internal affairs investigators dressed in cheap suits and carrying heavy briefcases commandeered the captain's office. Forensics technicians in white Tyvek suits were outside photographing the Shelby GT 500 from every angle, dusting the door handles and bagging the evidence. Bennett sat Sawyer down on a chair in the middle of the bullpen, refusing to let him be moved to an interrogation room. A paramedic was tending to Sawyer's temple, applying a butterfly bandage. Bennett stood next to the chair, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, his tie loosened. He watched as a state trooper walked in, carrying a plastic evidence bag. Inside was the small packet of white powder Tate had found. "Mr. Attorney General," the trooper said, nodding respectfully, "we've done a preliminary dusting of the baggie found in your vehicle." Kowalski, sitting on a bench across the room under guard, scoffed. "Waste of time. It was under the seat. The kid's prints will be on it." The trooper ignored him. He looked directly at Bennett. "The outer surface of the bag has smudges consistent with handling by Officer Tate," the trooper reported. "However, we found a partial thumbprint trapped underneath the adhesive tape used to seal the bag." The room went deadly quiet. "Under the tape?" Bennett asked, his eyes narrowing. "Yes, sir, which implies the print was left by the person who packaged the narcotics, not the person who bought or held them." The trooper turned and walked toward Kowalski. He held up a digital scanner. "Officer Kowalski, thumb now." Kowalski turned pale. I handled that bag after I found it. That proves nothing." "If your print is under the seal," Bennett said, his voice cutting through the air like a scalpel, "it proves you sealed the bag. It proves possession. And since you claimed you found it in my son's car, it proves fabrication of evidence." Kowalski didn't move. Bennett turned his gaze to the rookie. Tate was standing in the corner, shaking like a leaf. He looked at Kowalski, then at the Attorney General, then at the terrifying prospect of federal prison. "Officer Tate," Bennett said softly. Tate jumped. "You have one chance," Bennett said. "Right now, this second, you are a rookie. You followed orders. But if you lie to me, if you try to cover for him, I will ensure you spend the next 10 years in a cell next to him." "Did my son have drugs in that car?" Tate looked at Kowalski. Kowalski glared back, a silent threat in his eyes. "Don't you rat on me." Tate looked at Sawyer. He saw the blood on the college student's face. He saw the future he was about to throw away for a man who bullied him every day. "No," Tate whispered. "Speak up," Bennett commanded. "No," Tate shouted, tears welling in his eyes. "No, sir. The car was clean. Sergeant Kowalski had the bag in his vest pocket. I saw him take it out before he leaned under the seat. He told me to turn off my body cam. He told me to write it up." "You lying little rat," Kowalski roared, lunging off the bench. Two state troopers slammed Kowalski back against the wall before he could take a step. The sound of his face hitting the cinder block was a sickening crunch. "Cuff him," the lead trooper ordered. Kowalski screamed obscenities as his arms were wrenched behind his back. The metal cuffs clicked shut, the same sound Sawyer had heard earlier, but this time it sounded like justice. "Vince Kowalski," the trooper recited, "you are under arrest for perjury, filing a false report, planting evidence, assault, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law." As they dragged Kowalski past the desks, he locked eyes with Bennett Sterling. "You think this is over?" Kowalski screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "I'm a cop. The union will—" "The union won't touch you," Bennett said calmly, "and neither will a jury. I'm going to personally oversee the prosecution. I will make sure you never see the sun without iron bars in front of it again." They hauled him out. The doors slid shut. The precinct was quiet again. Bennett turned to the chief of police. Knox looked like a ghost. "I expect your resignation on my desk by morning, Warren," Bennett said, "or I will launch a corruption probe into this entire department that will make the history books." Knox nodded slowly. He knew when he was beaten. "Yes, sir." Bennett turned to Sawyer. The paramedic had finished. "Ready to go?" he asked, his voice softening instantly. Sawyer stood up. His legs were shaky, but he stood tall. He looked at the officers around the room, the ones who had laughed, the ones who had watched, the ones who had done nothing. They all looked away, ashamed. "Yeah, Dad," Sawyer said. "Let's go home." They walked out of the precinct together. The cool night air hit them, fresh and clean compared to the stagnant rot inside. The Shelby GT 500 was being loaded onto a flatbed by the state police for secure transport. "Dad," Sawyer said, looking at the car. "The fender, the hood. He dented it when he slammed me. I'm sorry. I know how much you love that car." Bennett stopped. He reached out and adjusted Sawyer's collar, brushing a speck of dust from his son's shoulder. He looked at the bruise forming on Sawyer's temple, and his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and fierce, overwhelming love. "Sawyer," Bennett said, pulling his son into a hug. "That car is just metal and rubber. You can replace a fender, you can rebuild an engine, but I cannot replace you." He kissed his son's forehead. "Let the car burn for all I care. I got the only thing that matters back." Bennett opened the door of the chief's SUV, which he had commandeered for the ride home. Now Bennett smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "Let's go get some ice for that eye. And maybe we work on your defense attorney skills. You forgot to ask for a specific statute during the interrogation." Sawyer laughed, a short, sharp sound of relief. "I'll study up for the midterms." As they drove away, leaving the flashing lights of the precinct behind them, the balance of the world shifted back into place. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fair that it took a title and a tuxedo to get justice. But for tonight, the good guys had won, and the bad guys had learned a lesson they would never ever forget. The story of Sawyer Sterling is fictional, but the fear is real. It highlights a terrifying reality where power unchecked leads to corruption, and where the thin blue line can sometimes become a wall that blocks out the truth. In this case, justice was served because Sawyer had a lifeline, a father with the power to fight back. But it begs the question, what happens to the sons and daughters who don't have an attorney general on speed dial? What happens to the voices that scream in the dark with no one to listen? Justice shouldn't be a privilege for the well-connected. It should be a right for everyone. Officer Kowalski thought he was the law, but he forgot that the law is watching him too. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It helps more people see this content. What would you have done in Sawyer's shoes? Would you have kept your cool, or would you have fought back? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more stories where justice is served cold, make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a video. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.